Hello and welcome. My name is Polly Mertens. I'm an eating disorder and life success coach, having recovered from bulimia for over 20 years. And joining me today is Moira Kucaba, and Moira is going to share her story. Moira, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Polly. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. And I know you to be such a heart-centered person, and giving back and helping others is so valuable to you. It's how we spread our message in the world, right? It's how we make that bigger impact that we're up to. And so by doing this, I really honor you for what you're up to, and look forward to sharing all of your story with anyone who finds this. And at the end of this, we'll definitely have information about how people can contact you, contact me, wherever this is shared. I'm sure there'll be information for people to follow up, because I'm excited to share this amazing woman with all of you. If you don't know Moira and you're going to get to know her story, she and I came into contact, I don't know how many years ago, but it's been a few years now. And as a eating disorder coach, now success coach, I help people who are struggling with areas of their life, typically around food, but then they go on and beyond that, and they do amazing things, because I'm up to helping people live a life they love, right? So why I asked you to join me today was to share, most specifically around what it was like, having an eating disorder, and now what it's like afterward. Because I find that when people share their story, people can resonate with both parts. It's like, oh, that's me now, and I want that for myself. So can we start, just tell us a little bit of a high level of, what it was like. Where did it start? What was life with an eating disorder like for you, my dear?
Yeah, I think unlike a lot of people with eating disorders, maybe not, I never, ever thought about anything in regards to my body image, food. It was never an issue for me. My whole childhood, I grew up in a really balanced, happy home. I was an athlete. So I think that too helped kind of shelter me from, I was active. And so weight was never an issue. And, I ate all kinds of food because I was an athlete and I had to. And so that wasn't even on my radar. But I was that competitive athlete. I was very driven from a young age. I did really well in school. I did well with sports. I did well with piano, kind of whatever it was that I picked up, I ran with it. And so I definitely came into this world as what I now term a very driven personality versus an addictive personality, which I kind of used to call it that. And so I ended up, I also have alcoholism in my family. It wasn't in my immediate family, but when I got to high school, I really ended up, having my first drink, and I took that and ran with it, just like I took everything and ran with it. And I fell into several years of a really pretty low bottom battle with alcohol and drugs. And I got sober, thank goodness, thank God, literally at 21. And when I got sober, I literally set down alcohol and picked up an eating disorder almost simultaneously. I started eating tons of sugar to stuff the emotions, and I started gaining weight, and I didn't know what to do with the emotions. I didn't know what to do with the weight. And so I really quickly fell into bulimia. And that was just, it quickly became almost a daily thing. And it was, I just fell deeper. It was almost like the more I worked on it and the more I tried to hammer at that problem that I knew was not okay, the more trapped I got. I was living in California at the time, and I went to therapists, I went to dietitians, I went to all the things, I tried really hard to solve the problem. And I really feel like a lot of those roads actually led me further down the dark road. I ended up moving to the East Coast, same kind of thing. I remember moving here thinking like, this is the time. I can't bring this with me. I really have to, get over this. And seeking help here, it was the same thing. I just went down every single avenue I could possibly go down. Overeaters Anonymous. I remember going on some random weekend in Florida that was like an eating disorder thing, and I just felt consumed by it. And if you have an eating disorder or have had one, it is one of the most awful living hells that you can live in, because unlike alcoholism, which really allows you to kind of detach and black out and escape, with an eating disorder, you're still kind of conscious and going through your everyday life. So you feel, I mean, the shame is just so big, you know, and the self-loathing, because you're putting on this face to the world and you're going through your life and you're harboring this horrible secret that just makes you hate yourself, and you're trapped. You're just absolutely trapped, and you have no presence in your life with the people that mean things to you or the experiences. And I can remember like holidays, just feeling like I was robbed of every single holiday because of the obsession. It's a literal living hell. It is. Yeah.
And one of the things it seems like from hearing what you're saying is, I forget the C word that you used, but it was like confusion also, right? Like you were consumed by it, but you were also confused, right? Because we find ourselves, I mean, I think you would say like very successful, like you're out doing athletics, you're, you know, getting probably a college degree, you know, living your life, doing great things in the world. And a lot of the clients who come to me are very successful people.
Yes.
High achieving women, but we get confused. Like, how do we do this? What's not working, right? So,
yeah.
And I meant to read an intention, and I want to pause. I want to share more of your story, but let me just take a step back. So, tell me if you share this intention with me, okay? It's our intention that during this conversation and the weeks following, you'll be more powerful over your thoughts, your behaviors, and begin seeing yourself making the changes you want to make so you have the life you want to have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's how you live your life now, right? It's like, it's by design. It's the way, it's with intention instead of this confusion and kind of at the mercy of things happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I think when we have the ability to, and I hate to use the word control because that can have such a negative connotation, but when we truly are aware of our thoughts and we can control them and we can direct them, it's just everything. It changes everything. Yeah.
Something you just said reminds me of something I have come to realize, you know, after I got out of my own recovery and then just working with a lot of women is, and we know this because you and I both studied Tony Robbins, is state management, right? Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite Tony quotes is, lousy states create lousy decisions, right? Yeah. And I find that bulimia is a state of disempowerment. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you know, what I've learned so much from Tony, but also it's just, I was thinking about it this morning that, you know, the quality of our life is truly the quality of our emotional state. And when you are trapped by an eating disorder and you live in those negative emotional states, that is what your life becomes. You know, no matter what's going on the outside, if you are absolutely miserable and in those low emotional states, that's what your life is, no matter what's going on the outside, for sure.
Right. And very consuming. You've talked about that. And I would say, you know, as I have been in this work for over 5 years now and watching videos of people who, you know, quickly recover. And then there's those of us that work at it. You know, me, 20 years, relapses back and forth, you know, trying different things, all sorts of strategies. And I was on a webinar the other day and they were saying about how, the way it was presented, while they weren't saying willpower, it was just, you just like sit with it. Right. And I don't know anyone that comes to me after that many years, you know, maybe if you've just had, you know, 6 months and you kind of fell into it a little bit and you can kind of willpower yourself out of it. But, you know, with the work with Tony and mindset shifting and behaviors and beliefs and things, that there's a lot more going on often. So what I want to dive into is, I find that transformation is from old story to new story, right? And so I'd love to hear some of what your old story sounded like. If you can remember back to some of the things maybe you said to yourself in the beginning, either that had you pick up the food or, you know, like fall into the bulimia, that you started to believe it and be like, well, this is okay. And then maybe tell us like throughout, because getting into understanding your story, your mindset, and the shift, what it was before and what it sounds like now, I think will help people understand, oh yeah, I sound like that, and here's an alternative. This is what my life could sound like.
I think you know, there's two things come to mind. There's probably 1,000 storylines that have changed for me, but what really is at the basis of all of that is my identity of struggle. my identity of having a problem, my identity of having an eating disorder, you know, my identity that if this gigantic thing in my life could just get pounded somehow into place, then everything's magically going to work out. And the more, and the work that I did with you, which was the solution for me and the transforming turning point in my life, was I remember you saying, the more efforting you put into something, when you're efforting, you're resisting it. And I was like, that makes so much sense, because the harder I worked at my eating disorder, the more trapped I became. And like you said, the confusion, that made no sense to me. Anything that I ever wanted to accomplish in my life or learn or succeed at, I just went after it with gusto and figured it out and put time and energy into it. And so that's every single thing in my life except for this. And when I put more time and more energy into the eating disorder, the more trapped I was. And so when I started to have that shift, where I remember a lot of our conversations, you would just be like, okay, so let's move on. Like if I had a relapse or a slip, or, you know, it was just like, well, let's not even talk about that. Let's talk about like where we're going. And the part of you that is beautiful and whole and healthy, because I was all of those things, even with that behavior happening. And all I was seeing was I was 100% that behavior that I hated. And one of the other gigantic shifts that must have driven you crazy working with me was I totally identified myself as a sugar addict. I believed beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was 100% addicted to sugar, and that when I ate sugar, something chemically happened. So all this mind stuff was great, but you don't get it, Polly. When I eat something with sugar, I can't stop. I'm an alcoholic. It just makes sense. This is how my body works. And I couldn't shift that for the longest time. And I now know that sugar is an addictive substance. It is to every human body on the planet, but not necessarily any differently for me, you know? And instead of identifying myself as a victim and being powerless in that, which gave me no shot at success, I had to really start to shift my beliefs and find validity in the other story. Does that make sense?
Oh, you're just like, I mean, you get it. You totally get it. This is the, you know, the work that we've done together is, you know, in the beginning. So if you can remember some of our calls and just the work that you've done with Tony too, is like a belief is a tabletop, right?
Yes.
And
I love this analogy. I love it.
It has lots of legs, right? It's like, I've done it once, I've done it twice. Oh, my friends have it. Lots of people. It's solid. It's like, like I'm a sugar addict. You've got lots of years of practicing it. So it's like, well, look at it. Look, everyone, I can see it. I'm doing it. Here's my behavior. And what I try to propose, and what I think anyone with change is like, oh, there's this other story over here that has no legs, right? It's like floating in the middle of nowhere, like, maybe I'm not that. And sometimes some of the work we would do is I'd send you out there and go find the legs of it. You know, I'm like, Moira, you got to find people that have different things and look for different evidence. It's like putting on a new set of glasses, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I love how you said I had to change my belief, right? Because both are available. Right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like you did that. So do you remember what you did? Do you remember some of the work that you did? If you can remember specifically or generally, or just what's different now?
Well, for instance, and this kind of blurs the line with, you know, going into all of it means I'm an addict, right? I'm an alcoholic. I'm an addict. I'm a sugar addict. I'm a food addict. So I really had this identity around being an addict. And I mean, lightheartedly, like, that's just how I operate. You know, when I have a piece of cake, I eat the whole cake. Like, I'm not leaving a crumb on the plate. No, I mean, funny, we're talking about eating disorders and I bring up cake, but I'm like that with everything. And what and so that identity for me, if you can try to wrap your head around this, I'm also sober. So my belief and my fear was, if I give up that identity, and I see it in rooms of recovery, if I don't believe I'm an alcoholic, I will drink and I will die. My sister died of alcoholism young. So it is such a real fear. I think anybody can understand that, yes, Moira, you cannot ever forget that you're an alcoholic.
Right.
But what I started to shift around all of this addict, alcoholic story was I really started to look for proof in the world. And I'll never forget going out to brunch with a friend of mine, and her husband is an ultra marathoner, 100-mile races. And he's telling me about his races, and I just kind of stopped him and I said, can I ask you a random question? And he's like, sure. And I said, are your parents alcoholics? And he like sat there and was like, yeah. How did you know that? And I was like, oh, just makes sense in the proof that I'm collecting. You know what really made sense, and it was huge for me. It was huge that I started to see proof for the gift that I was given, the gift of my personality of coming into this world with this insatiable drive for whatever I put my mind to. I chose in high school to pick up drugs and alcohol, and I ran with it. He chose to pick up running, and he ran with it, because I can tell you, not many people can be ultramarathon runners.
Right.
And so I really understood that this was just simply how I channeled it. Mm-hmm. And I get to channel it however I want, and what a gift instead of what a curse.
Yeah. I was thinking this morning, some of what you're pointing out to me, I was thinking this morning about the words, because I use a lot in my coaching the word story, right? Tony uses the word story. And then I hear other people talk about mindset, and I'm like, well, those are really the same. So story and mindset. And I said, what creates that, or what causes that? And Tony likes to use the word decision, right? And when I started to like connect the dots, is it's changing the story you begin to believe.
Yeah.
And you call it a decision, right? Some people say, oh, I made this decision. And sometimes it's a firm, you know, like for me, an identity shift was, I'm a non-bulimic. And I started to walk into the world and say, I'm a non-bulimic, I'm a non-bulimic. And at first it was like, is this true? You know, like, what is that? And for you, it was like, I'm not an addict, or I'm more powerful than that story, you know. And I don't know what it is for you now, or what you transitioned it to, but you made a decision, you made a choice, it sounds like, to believe a new story and start living into that new story.
Yeah, an empowering story, you know? Right. It's a similar story, but it's a story that serves me instead of enslaves me. Yeah.
Yeah. And out of that, what's possible, right? Right? The old story, I was like, oh, well, I can't do that because of this, or, oh, I can't, you know, I can't, or this always happens to me, right? And we see right. that. It's curious, I've been finding just with the state of people's lives and the state of our culture, and not only do we have stories at our level, we also have stories at the cultural level, so the society that we live in, right? And one of them that I've been seeing a lot for women especially is the busy one, the busy mom, the overwhelm and stuff. And when we tell that story from a place of, I'm so overwhelmed, too many kids, you know, things just seem bigger than us and our experience of it, and we don't relate to it like, oh, I got this, then what, just like you're talking about, like my eating disorder is this manic, huge thing instead of something that, oh yeah, I got this. And it's not something you have to tackle and wrestle to the ground like you're talking about.
Yeah. And I love that, you know, the shift into, it's just a part of me, because like we can take that into any emotion too. I think when we're like, I'm so angry, that is encompassing all of us. Every part of me is angry. When it's like, no, just this small part over here is angry about this situation because of these circumstances. Mm-hmm. Like there's a whole 99% of the rest of you that's fine, you know?
I get angry, I'm not angry.
Yes, yes.
Between my identity as an angry person and I'm a person who experiences anger.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to talk, so you said a little bit ago, and I forget exactly how you said it, but I think it had to do with the sugar addict, because I have a lot of people who come to me with the story that very fear-based, I'll get fat if I don't have bulimia, right? Like that's one of the biggest mental blocks is, well, if I don't do it this way, one of them is I won't be able to eat what I want. And that I lived in that one for a long time, right? It was like, oh, well, I can't have these foods that I binge on, which felt like I was giving up my family, you know, because they were my comfort foods for so long. Like, I have to say no to cake and ice cream and things like that. I was afraid of letting that go. And what I realized is, no, you just choose it on the other side. So did you have the fear, I'll get fat if I don't?
Did I ever? Oh my gosh, like the biggest one, you know? And I feel like that story just kind of dissolved through like so much of this. I feel like we want to, you know, hammer at the issue. And for me, it was this shift into where I was focusing my thoughts. And that might sound weird for some people, but a very concrete example, I can remember being in like the kind of the grip of it and really struggling, you know, with it in everyday life. And I can remember an experience where, you know, we get obsessive thoughts, and they feel out of control. And I can remember being out on the boat with my family, and you and I had talked before this, and you were talking about just trying to pay attention to what really mattered, you know, focus my thoughts on my children and my husband and my surroundings. And I remember the candy in the cooler, like literally talking to me, and me getting like the obsessive thoughts of like, if I eat it, I'm not throwing it up and I'm going to get fat. And just like this obsessive spiral that goes out of control. And I started to learn how to just be aware that that was just a thought. I had control of my mind to cut it off just like that. And I would just look at the clouds. I would find something of beauty. And for me, so often it was I would just like catch myself in the insanity and look at my children's faces or look at the clouds, wherever I was, because I can look out the window right now and see clouds. And I would just cut the thought off, because the thought is what leads to the behavior. I would cut the thought off, and I started to understand that my recovery really comes from just shifting into those positive emotional states. And the more I can live in positive emotional states, this darkness is just going to start to fall away without effort. You know?
You know, it may sound hard for some to believe.
Right.
Right. Because you, like me, sometimes I look at it like a tunnel, like we were on the other side of the tunnel, we went through it, and now we're on the other side. And the experience of it, mine was exactly the same. I didn't work on recovery. You know, I wasn't over here, or I was over here working on having new beliefs, having a wonderful life, focusing on the you know, what's wrong is always available. And so is what's right. Right. So I was focusing on, you know, what was good in the world, and creating those shifts. And I think the state of empowerment that I talked about a minute ago, you were keeping yourself in a resource state. So those choices, those moment to moment choices, I can choose to go in that cooler and get that candy, or I can choose to look at my kid's face. Subtle and small, but very micro. And I would tell you, I was like, Myra, it's not these huge decisions that you think you're going to make. It's those micro decisions.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. And really also consciously thinking like, is this my head? You know, my head, this eating disorder part of my brain that I've just wired it there. It's habit. That is what wants the candy. My soul does not. My soul wants my children and this day and this experience. And I have the choice right now. Do I want to listen to that, or do I want to listen to what is going to serve my soul and my spirit? And it's not always the easiest thing to choose between, you know. I love the analogy of, you know, I am very into neuroplasticity and how we wire our brain, and how truly we have wired our brain like physically to have these eating disorder tracks, and this like, why couldn't I have stopped? And I just kind of like went into a black hole and like ended up binging and purging. And like, how did that happen? I didn't want this to happen. And it's because it's just automatic. It's wired. And when I really started to understand that part as well, that this wasn't a moral or ethical issue, that this was just simply brain circuitry that I needed to fix. I love the analogy of the marble at the top of the sand, like this big sand pile, and there's a little marble at the top, and you put the marble on, and like you've got this deep groove to where, you know, that's your binge purge circuit.
Yep.
And every time you put the marble on there without thinking anything, it just automatically goes down that groove. 100% of the time it's going to do that. And when you start to create these shifts, you put the marble at the top and you start through a little bit of trying to create a different path. And lo and behold, you put the marble at the top and damn it just went down the old path again. What happened? But that was so much of the shift that you and I worked with. Like I would call and I would be completely like trapped again. Like, oh my God, Polly, I was doing so good. And like, it happened again. And like, it came out of nowhere. And you were like, no big deal. Your marble just went down the old path. And I started to see that my progress in recovery was the emotional part right there after the slip happened. The slip was the slip. It didn't really matter. The progress that I needed to make was to then go, oh, okay, you're right. No big deal. Like moving on. Let's get on with this. Let's get on with this life. And just to completely detach from any negative emotion about a slip.
Yes. Yes. Because you were adding energy. We talk about it's energy. And when we take out that stick, I call it like a big stick, and we beat ourselves up with it. Right. That is just further keeping us in that disempowered state, right? Yes. It's like a woman who sees herself as beating herself up. Is she going to take steps to do something different next time? Is she going to feel good about tomorrow and the next day? And so just being there for you was going, oh, okay, let me get out of that. Let me get that shift. And you did. So, so good. And, one of the things I just want to say, and I try and remember to say this in early coaching client calls, is you created it and you can uncreate it.
Yeah. You
created it and you can uncreate it. Because when we remember that power is in our hands, it's not out there. It's not, I can remember that like feeling of that monster, that overwhelming urge. But it's like, but I also need to remember I created it, just like you said.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So just have some questions here. What is your life like today? So we've talked some about, what, and please tell people what you do, because some people that are finding this, they don't know who you are. And I didn't do a great job of, giving you this big intro. So toot your horn a little bit. My gosh, woman, you are up to amazing things. It has been just my divine honor to watch you bloom like no other.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's in large part due to this work. I always knew for so long that I had, as much as I dealt with, low self-esteem, which people always find that hard to believe. I'm like, oh my gosh, the queen over here, like self-loathing, low self-esteem, being less than everybody. I also knew that there was greatness within. Like I knew that if given the right opportunity, and my story back then was if I could just get over the eating disorder, I would find happiness. I would find massive success. I knew somewhere deep down that I was capable of that. And so I stepped into coaching, which, when I started coaching, I thought, what business do I have to be coaching anyone, because I'm a mess. But the magic of coaching is when you have to lead from the front, you really show up. And I will show up for other people way more than I would ever show up for myself. That's not necessarily a good trait, but it's just reality. And so I stepped into health fitness, and I would say health fitness and mindset coaching, because this is my jam. I mean, I love personal development. I love helping people with what's up here. I was a Pilates instructor for 13 years, and I had my own business, and I got to work on people's physical, and I got to talk to people, but I never really had the tools and the techniques to actually give them to create real change in their life. And so I coach people through that. I just started a little less than 3 years ago. And I'm number 5 in the company out of 500,000. And I mean, it's unbelievable. Like I just had to give a speech in Kansas City this weekend, and like they announced me and all the accolades and, this big picture up on the prompter. And I was like, who are they talking about? Like, it's so hard to believe, but but it's so not hard to believe, you know, because I believe we are all capable of that. We are all capable of whatever we want to create for ourselves. And even the work behind that, I understood that I'm a hard worker. I will put in the hours. I will drive. I will, you know, do what I need to do. So attaining what I wanted to attain doesn't come from having to work harder. The work that I really needed to do just last year to end in the top 10 was the belief, the unwavering belief that it was just going to happen and that this was where I was intended to be. And I had to lean into the vision of it and the seeing of it and the feeling of it. You know, one of my favorite expressions is that the universe doesn't hear what we say, it hears what we feel. And we get what we believe, not what we want. And I get to coach a team and clients through that every day. I'm like, you know, if you want this eating disorder to go away, or you want to lose 10 pounds, or you want this job success, if you want it, that doesn't really matter. If you fear it and you think there's no way it's going to happen and you're inevitably going to fail, then you're just going to get that. So let's not work on the how. Let's work on what's going on up here.
Yeah, you know, and I wholeheartely agree because, you know, studying Tony Robbins, he would say that there's no force stronger than the human's identity. Right?
Yeah.
In our psyche, what we believe about ourselves, the way that the world is, will either propel us or keep us back. And just in you sharing your story, it was like, I believed that I was an addict and living with, and you know, to no fault of Alcoholics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, I think they do great things in connecting people, hope. You know, I went to Overeaters when I was a young girl, and I saw that, wow, there's other people, you know, like me. At least I felt gotten, right? But when we have to affirm, and we know the power of our words and the power of our language, if we keep affirming that out loud within our head, you know, and I know you do your morning process and your morning, you know, your miracles, and you affirm who you are, even if you don't necessarily believe it today, right? And you live into it. Right?
Yeah. And you know, what's coming to mind right now, which is so mind-blowing and powerful, was when I was in this struggle working with you and I felt stuck in my story and not sure that I was going to get out of it. I remember doing some work with you and you saying, like, I came to some things on my own and you kind of pulled it out and you said, Moira, don't you see you one day sharing this story, talking to women, being a light. And I remember thinking that I was going to be doing something with my church at that point. And I remember thinking, maybe I'm going to be at the front of that congregation sharing my story. And a year to a year and a half later, I was in the Superdome speaking to 30,000 people. Like what does Abraham say? Like, this is the energy that creates worlds. So for some people to think like, oh, well, that's just such a lark that, you know, you went from that to speaking to 30,000 people on stage in a year or a year and a half. No. Like, we put limits on ourselves so much.
And I think sometimes it's either the people we hang around with, what we surround ourselves with, and, you know, the beauty of you and the work that you do with your clients and the coaching that you do is sometimes a coach can see something for you that you can't yet see for yourself, right? And I just planted a seed within you that I knew was there, you know, and you stepped to it and started believing it too. And you didn't even have to believe it like, well, let me work on that. You just said, oh, well, if that's possible. And I don't know if you've seen this in your life, but sometimes the things that we, you know, you create vision boards, I create vision boards, and it's been miraculous to me. Some of the things that, you know, if I intend, and I want really, let's say, with some focus, and then like a lot of things just happen that I don't even focus on, right? You know, like I'll have something on my vision board, I'm like, oh, that's right, that happened, right? and it seems miraculous. There's, the universe has lots of.
Oh my gosh, I have so many stories of that. Yes. Yes.
So right now, I remember you earlier this year, we were talking about your proof journal. Is that what you're calling it? Or, yeah. Share that, would you?
So I've kept a gratitude journal for 10 years, 20 years, probably since I got sober. And, there's so much power in gratitude. You're focusing on the good. And, when you were talking about the busy mom story, I'm like, we're all busy, but we all also have these sacred moments of bliss. And if we focus on that, our life feels very balanced. So it's what we're focusing on, we feel, and that's our life. And so gratitude is amazing. But after 19 years of keeping a gratitude journal, it just wasn't really working for me anymore. And so I had this, like what you call this 2 millimeter shift. And I started to focus on the proof that the universe was showing up for me, the proof that what happened to me personally was I felt like I had this big dip in my business in February, and I got wrapped up in a lot of fear, and I started focusing on what wasn't working. And so I really wanted to seek the clarity in that. So, I saw what I did want in my business, very crystal clear. And so I started to keep a book of proof about how that was happening. So every customer that called, every client that emailed, every phone call that just miraculously came my way, and it was like an avalanche, just like that. When I started to really seek the proof that was there, whether I was focusing on it or not, it just started to come tenfold, 20-fold, 30-fold.
What is it? What you give thanks for, you get more to be thankful for.
Yes.
So, and it's that, it's not the, what don't I have? Because what we don't have, and it's one thing to sit for a moment. You can't, answer the question. I'm sorry, you can't get the solution in the question, right? Mm-hmm. My boyfriend has this real estate business, and he's like, how am I going to grow this? How am I going to grow this? How am I going to get the money for this? Growing his and leveling up his business. And I said, ask it once and then sit in the solution, sit in the receiving of it, right? Sit in that it's done. It's he's like, oh, it's done, and it's just a little shift of mind to, it's not undone. Like, I have to figure it out. I have to, you do still have to do things, be the energy of it, align for it. So can you share just a couple other rituals that you have that help you? You talked early on about, I worked on this area. I worked on myself, focusing on the positive, and the negative, the eating disorder sort of dissolved itself away. What are some of the ways that you, either today or back then, how did you start doing that? What were the little?
Yeah, I think back then I really, grabbed onto the triad that Tony teaches. And I really actually simplified it, probably because it was easier for me to just quickly do this very quick check-in and say, what's happening with my body and what's going on? What are the thoughts in my head? And those two things had to change right then. So I can remember one time getting trapped in this downward spiral of, I had eaten, I had overeaten, I didn't want that to continue. But I was like, the thoughts, I'm going to get fat, I'm going to gain weight. This is, what's like just catastrophic thinking. And I remember thinking, I need to shift these thoughts and I need to move my body. So I just went outside and got on my bike and went for a bike ride. And literally was just trying to think different thoughts and think about the trees and the sky and what I was grateful for. But that truly was so much of the solution in the beginning for me. Yeah. We just say stuck in the exact same physical position, and everybody says move a muscle, change a thought. Mm-hmm. Usually when you move a muscle, your thoughts change, but really actively changing both of those things. And the easiest thing to do is to change your physiology. Get up and do 10 jumping jacks, go for a bike ride, walk around the house, just do something. Mm-hmm. That will usually shift your thinking. But sometimes you've got to also be consciously shifting your thinking and just saying, this is what I'm focused on, and I'm changing my focus. Mm-hmm. And so that was a lot of that in the beginning.
I want to share two things that you just reminded me of. One is, I think the duality, the two things that you were focused on, because I hear people say, well, I'll go for a walk, or I'll do a hot bath, or, all these, soothing strategies that are millions of them.
Never worked for me.
Right. But you were doing both. Yeah. You were conscious that I'm creating the momentum of this empowerment. I'm creating the momentum of, I've got a problem. I can't solve this. I'm upset. I'm overwhelmed, whatever the momentum gets created by. So what I wanted to share was a moment I had earlier before our call. So, I teach, as Abraham does, about, the car at the top of the hill of San Francisco is like your emotional state. So you get a thought and you kind of nudge it off the hill. If you run out in front of it, you can stop it. Just a little bump, right? You have one or two thoughts. It's like, oh, what am I aware of? And then it goes down the hill in San Francisco, that urge to binge. People are trying to stop it at the bottom and it just runs them over, right? And here's how I was present to something like that this morning. I don't have the urge to, I don't have those overwhelming urges anymore, broke that pattern. But like this morning, I have sometimes a pattern of impatience or like, do I have enough time type of thing? So how this can show up is every thought also has a physical, a chemical reaction in our body. Mm-hmm. What I was present to this morning was, as I was getting ready for our call, I noticed the hit of chemicals wash through my body that said, stress, we're not gonna have enough time. So as soon as I felt those and I recognized the thought, I stopped it at the top of the hill and I said, no, I didn't let it perpetuate. I didn't start sweating, whatever. So I think you're right. It's catching that, but maybe catching it early as well.
Yeah.
And then working with the thoughts, and physiology. Absolutely.
And I just have to bring it back to what I said earlier for me, which was huge. When I didn't catch it and I did end up binging and purging, whatever, it was just like, oh, I just didn't catch it at the top. Like, okay. This doesn't mean I'm starting over from square one. This doesn't mean I'm a bad person. This doesn't mean this is hopeless, because that's another car at the top.
Right. I'll never get this
much speed, and I don't have control over that. I don't have control at some point. I just don't. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. So next time we'll try to do better, and just completely feeling detached from that. There was so much power in that, for sure.
Awesome. It's not the perfect. I have to do recovery perfectly. Right. It's like, if I have I say, don't turn speed bumps into black holes that you fall into, right? It's like, it's a speed bump. Okay. So keep on going, keep making that progress. So I'd love for you to share in these last moments that we have here, any gems of advice, anything that you want people to know about themselves, about what's possible through the tunnel, anything that you have as little words of wisdom for those that are listening that maybe are sitting where you and I were before we created it.
I think, I can say all the rainbows and butterflies things, like we are all 100% capable, 100%. And no one person is worse off than the next. You're not more trapped than the next person. But I am very analytical and practical. And you said this earlier too. I think that some of those things that you can put into place, that morning process, which for me is usually gratitude, prayer, visualization. 3-3-3. I'm very analytical. 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. Awesome. And that anchor in the morning that gets you in a good feeling place. I would have to start my day off in a high vibration. I would have to, and I still do, because who doesn't want to do that? And so I would start myself off in a very, high vibration place, happy place. And I would see the world differently, and I would treat the world differently, and it would treat me differently. And the second that I would kind of dip, I would try to regain my footing. But that's an anchor that I put into place and I continue to do every single day. And then, having these kind of practical things, like I'm always reading personal development or plugging it in with Audible. I drop my kids off at school and I listen to something for 10 minutes on the ride home, and it really gets my thinking in a really great place. Because I stepped into coaching, I stepped into the most incredibly amazing, it's like hanging out with hundreds of polys all day long. I stepped into a different circle of influence that believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, that pushed me outside of my comfort zone, that was my motivation when I ran out of my own. Who you surround yourself with is everything. So I feel like those just, and personal development might sound like, well, how's that going to change my life? But 10 minutes a day, it's the compound effect over time. Like it adds up, it changes us, it creates change. And so that morning process, personal development, and who you're surrounding yourself with will completely change you as a human being.
It's those rituals and the consistency. It's what you're feeding your mind just as much as what you're feeding your body. I mean, you do a lot of work with helping people with what they put in their body.
Right.
And on top of that, you layer what they put into their mind, because without a healthy mind, I used to do a lot of business consulting and business coaching, and I would teach classes and I'd give people all the strategies. Here's all the tools. Here's everything you need to go be successful, start a business, whatever. If their mind wasn't right, if I couldn't help them with getting out of their own way or believing in themselves or whatever, then strategies, they fall flat. So.
And I completely agree. I mean, that was so much of my talk this weekend was, I work with coaches that want to build businesses. And I'm like, you guys, the strategies like this. I'm not going to give you the secret sauce. There is no secret sauce. The secret sauce is working on what's going on in between your ears, Yeah.
So tell us what your organization is, how people can find you.
My brand is Moira Kucaba. So it's as simple as that. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, all of that, YouTube, things like that. It's, and you'll probably have it printed somewhere, but it's Kucaba, Kucaba. I am a Beachbody coach. So that's kind of the company that I get to partner with to use their programming and all of that. So just reach out if you need anything. And, I want to end by saying after let me think about this, 15 to 20 year struggle, daily living hell struggle of, bulimia, you were the solution and you were the turn in the road and the pivot point in my life that led me out of that hell and into recovery. But also, if it wasn't for that, there is no possible way that I would be helping hundreds and thousands of people on the platform that I get to. When I just saw myself on maybe a little church stage one day sharing my story. So the ripple effect of your work is big. So thank you.
And is yours right back at you, my dear. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So my hope with and my intention and my belief that anyone listening to this who was moved either by Moira's story or something that you heard her say or me say, that you take one step, one action, take one thing, because there's so many things. You could listen to this 100 times and get a lot of little different things. But I just want to encourage you and invite you to take one step today and then keep doing it and keep doing it. And as you see the progress, reward yourself, surround yourself, as Moira said, with amazing people, amazing things that you take in all the time, but do one thing today and then build upon that and build upon that. So Moira, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the opportunity to coach you, work with you, continue to be your friend and just colleague as well. So
absolutely, Polly. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. More than words can say.